All right, demo B1. So the beginning of mini exams, we always start out with this academic conduct code. So I've gone through and entered my initials. We're going to call this one Taylor's version. All right. So I've crossed out, I made a mistake when I printed this out. So I've just entered a new demand curve. But the first part of the question is about consumer surplus. So we have the preferences for butterbeer represented by this demand curve. So we're asked a bunch of questions about this demand curve, consumer surplus, and then quantity demanded. So we're just going to go through and try to answer these things. So as always, when we do these kinds of questions, it's particularly helpful to have a graph. So what I'm going to do first, before I start doing any algebra, is just setting up the graph. So I'm going to take this demand curve and plot it. So on the vertical axis, we have 100. And then we have a negative slope. I'm not going to worry so much about the slope itself, but we'll just draw some sort of demand curve. Okay, so we'll call this demand, as one might expect. And then we're asked about two different prices. And so we're going to plug these prices in and calculate a couple of things. So the first one is price of 40. So this is going to be, like around here. It doesn't have to be perfect. We will plug this in and try to find what the quantity demanded at a price of 40 is. So let's just take 40, set that equal to our demand curve. And I'm going to drop the quantity demanded subscript and just solve for Q. Okay, so this is 1/2 Q is equal to 60. So then that tells us that Q at a price of 40 is going to be 120. Okay, so this thing here is 120. And now let's just plug this into our answer. So this is 120. So the question is about consumer surplus at a price of 40. So what we need to do is go through and find the area of the triangle. So consumer surplus is just, it's everything that's sold, everything that's bought. So we have a quantity demanded of 120. Here in these questions, we're not saying anything about sellers. So we're just going to assume everything that's demanded is bought. Okay, so we have 120 as our base, and we have a height of 60. We go from 100 to 40. So this is a height of 60 times a base of 120. And then we multiply that by 1/2. So this thing comes out to be, this is 120 divided by 2 is 60. So this is 60 times 60, which, it's like 6 times 6 times 100. So that's 3600. Okay, so this is consumer surplus at a price of 40 is 3600. All right, so nice. The next part of this question is about a price of 50. So we're going to find a quantity at a price of 50. So in this case, we want, we're going to do the same process we did with the price of 40. So we just plug in 50 into the demand curve and then solve for Q. So we have 50 is equal to 1/2 Q, and then this gives us that Q is equal to 100. So this is 100 here. All right. So the next thing we do, we want to plug it in, enter it into our handy little answer guide. We want to find consumer surplus at this new quantity. So now that things are getting a little more complicated or sort of cluttered, I'm going to add CS down here, and then we'll call this CS prime, just to sort of indicate, maybe we'll put a box around CS. And if you wanted to use more than one color here, you could. So we could, call this CS prime, and put a little triangle here. Got a little messy. All right, so we're going to find CS prime. So CS prime is equal to the height, which is 50, times the base, which is 100, and then we divide that by 1/2. So this gives us 50 times 50, which it's 5 times 5 times 100, which is 2,500. Okay, so then we just enter this in our handy little entry box, and we're all set. So now we're going to do the same thing essentially, but for producers. So let's jump over here. We have, the supply curve for butterbeer represented by these things. And so, we can plot this. Gives us sort of a sense of kind of what we're working with. The vertical intercept is at 10, and we have our supply curve. I forgot to label price and quantity over here. Those are helpful to keep our mind straight. Even if you work with these things a lot, it's good to add these labels. All right, so let's start out at a price of 40. Plug this into our supply curve and find the quantity supplied. So how much are sellers selling at a price of 40? So we have 40 is equal to 10 plus 1, whoops, 2/3 Q, and then we'll just solve for Q. So this thing becomes 2/3 Q is equal to 30, which gives us, so this is Q, 15 times 3. So it's 30 times 2/3, which comes out to be 45. If you do that, you can do this in your head, but you can also just plug that into a calculator. Whoops, 3/2. So we're dividing 30 by 2, and then we're multiplying it by 3. And that gives us, it's 15 times 3 is 45. Okay, so this thing is quantity of 45, and then we'll just put this into our entry box. All right, so next we need to find the producer surplus, which is, let's do this in blue actually. Producer surplus, and we'll put this in blue. All right, so we have producer surplus. We want to find the height, which is 30. The base is 45, so this is 30 times 45, and then we divide it by 2. So this thing becomes, 30 divided by 2 is 15. You can plug this into a calculator, and what I get is 675. All right. And then the next question is about the price of 50. So we want to plug this thing in to get a quantity supplied at 50. So again, we're just going to take 50, set that equal to our supply curve, which is 10.76 Q star. Okay, so then from here, we have one more step, which is Q star is equal to 90 times 6/7. And this thing comes out, if you plug this into your calculator, this comes out to be 540/7. Okay, weird number, but we found it. So this is 540/7. If you plugged this into your calculator and you got a decimal, that's fine too. I tend to prefer fractions, but decimals are fine. All right, and then we have P star. So here we can either plug this value into the supply curve or the demand curve. Turns out it doesn't matter, and that's because they're equal at this point. Prices are equal for the buyer and seller at our equilibrium. All right, so typically the supply curve is the easier one, so we'll do that. So we have 10 plus 2/3 times 540/7. So if you plug this into your calculator, what I get is 430 over 7. So this being our P star. Okay, so we'll just enter this into our entry box. So this is 430 over 7. All right. And then total surplus is going to be a little more straightforward. We don't even need P star for this. It's just going to be the height, which in this case, so we have 100 and we have 10. And then base is Q star, which is 540 over 7. So it's a height of 90 times 540 over 7, and then we multiply this by 1/2. Okay, so I don't have this pre-answered, but you just plug this into your calculator and that would show you a number here. Okay, so the last question is about butterbeer and some shocks. So, butterbeer is generally associated with a good time, but it turns out a high-profile wizard went viral slamming the taste. So, turns out, we respond to popular people on the internet, and so if people are disliking the taste, that changes preferences. Okay, so at the same time, so we can already tell there's something going on with demand. So I'm going to say demand is going to go down just from that first sentence. So at the same time, an ingredient in butterbeer, butter extract, became incredibly difficult for butterbeer makers to acquire. So this means it's going to be more difficult to make butterbeer. So again, we see a shift in the demand curve. Whoops, wrong way. We see a shift in or down, whichever way you conceive of it. And then we also see a supply shift up. It's now more difficult to produce butterbeer. So we see a shift up. At any quantity, it's more costly, and at any price, you make less. Okay, so from these two shifts separately, they both shift quantity down. So we know quantity is going to go down, but we don't know exactly what's happening with price. See, price is now moving here. We know for sure quantity is going to go down, so Q prime is now lower. But for prices, if the supply curve shift had been very large, then we would see a shift further out here, and the price would go up. But if the demand curve shift had been larger, then we'd see a price that would be lower. So this is what we call indeterminate. We need more information to be able to say how prices changed. The model on its own isn't enough. We need something else. We need to know the relative shifts of the two. Okay, so that's a mini exam I've given in the past. I will see you all in the next one.